What happens when the first family isn't just shaping a nation, but hiding unbelievable secrets? From political scandals to personal betrayals, the true stories behind America's most powerful families are more bizarre and disturbing than you ever thought possible. These are the hidden tales the first families never wanted you to know. Before we dive in, where are you watching from? What time is it in your city right now? Are you staying up late or watching during your lunch break? Let me know in the comments. I'm curious where all of you are tuning in from. 1. George Washington's skull almost got stolen, and it wasn't even the right one. It starts with a tomb that should have been a final resting place for a national hero. But instead, it became the target of a bizarre and chilling plot. In 1830, a group of grave robbers broke into George Washington's tomb at Mount Vernon, intending to steal his skull. Why? Because at the time, phrenology, the belief that you could read a person's character by the shape of their skull, was all the rage. To have Washington's skull would have been the ultimate prize for any phrenologist, a relic that could confirm the man's genius. But here's the twist. These thieves didn't get Washington's skull at all. They made a fatal mistake. In their haste, they grabbed the skull of a different family member, someone buried in the same vault but not the first president of the United States. Imagine the scene. These robbers, desperate for a prize, accidentally take a wrong skull, and then, realizing their mistake, panic. The skull was abandoned. The robbers fled empty-handed, but they had done enough damage to spark a nationwide scandal. The robbery created such a stir that Mount Vernon had to reinforce the tomb to prevent any future desecration. But even after the incident, the mystery around the stolen skull continued. Was it sold to collectors? Was it kept hidden away, perhaps buried with another body? No one ever found out. But here's where it gets more unsettling. The idea of Washington's grave being robbed didn't just ruin the security of Mount Vernon. It left a bizarre scar on Washington's legacy. For generations, people talked about the stolen skull, and the very thought that it was part of some grave robbing scheme haunted the memory of the man who had helped shape the nation. And yet, the controversy didn't die with the robbers. It lived on in the hearts of those who visited Washington's tomb, casting an eerie shadow over the place where the great president rested. It's not just the theft that's disturbing, it's the fact that such an event took place at the heart of American patriotism. We've always been told that Washington was a man of honor, whose legacy was to be respected and remembered forever. Yet, even in death, the robbers made it clear that no matter how sacred something is, there are those who will try to take it for their own. The incident at Mount Vernon wasn't just a petty crime. It was an assault on American history itself. And think about it. How far would someone go to possess a piece of history like that? This story reveals a disturbing truth. Even the most revered figures in history are not immune to exploitation after they've passed. How many other parts of Washington's legacy have been desecrated? Is there something even more hidden in the depths of his grave? A piece of history yet to be uncovered? 2. Thomas Jefferson's secret love affair with Sally Hemings. It begins with a man of power, Thomas Jefferson, one of America's most famous and influential figures. The author of the Declaration of Independence, a president, and a visionary. But behind Jefferson's public brilliance, there was a deeply troubling secret. A secret that could destroy his legacy if the world ever found out. Jefferson had a long-term, secret affair with Sally Hemings, one of his slaves. The affair lasted for years, and while Jefferson's public persona was that of a champion for liberty, the reality of his personal life tells a darker story. Hemings, Jefferson's younger half-sister-in-law, was forced into a relationship with the man who owned her. Their children, born to Hemings, were also enslaved and carried the stain of their father's betrayal. For decades, The relationship was kept hidden. Jefferson's public legacy as the enlightened founder of a free nation was built on a deep personal hypocrisy. Jefferson, a man who wrote about the freedom of mankind, was himself living in a system of oppression, one that he didn't just condone but actively engaged in. What makes this even more disturbing is that for generations, Jefferson's affair with Hemmings remained a well-kept secret. When historians finally began to piece together the evidence, the truth came to light. Even more unsettling, the children of Hemmings were not publicly recognized by Jefferson, and their lineage was denied by the state for decades. The descendants of Jefferson and Hemmings were forced to fight for recognition, for their place in history, while their father's actions were hidden behind the veil of respectability. The secrets of Jefferson's love affair continued to be erased from the public narrative until modern science and research finally brought this uncomfortable truth to the surface. 3. Andrew Jackson's deadly duel with Charles Dickinson. If you think of Andrew Jackson, you might imagine a strong, confident man, someone who fought wars and forged the nation's future. But Jackson was also known for his fiery temper, and it was this very temper that led to one of the most dangerous and dramatic duels in American history. It started with a simple insult. Charles Dickinson, a renowned duelist and strong-willed man, had insulted Jackson's wife, Rachel. Jackson, already known for his pride and short temper, could not let the insult go. So, on May 30th, 1806, Jackson challenged Dickinson to a duel. The two men met at dawn, both armed with pistols. But what makes this duel particularly chilling is what happened next. Dickinson shot Jackson first, hitting him in the chest. But Jackson didn't fall. Instead, he stood his ground and calmly aimed and fired back, hitting Dickinson with a fatal shot. Dickinson fell dead, while Jackson was left standing, wounded, but very much alive. The duel made Jackson a hero to some, but it also revealed a dark side to his character, one of ruthless pride and vengeance. Jackson's ability to calmly shoot a man dead after being wounded only added to his growing reputation as a man who would stop at nothing to defend his honor. This moment would come to define Jackson as much as his presidency would. Jackson's use of violence to settle personal disputes, his willingness to kill for honor, would become a disturbing pattern throughout his life. It was a side of Jackson that would surface in his political career as well, as he battled against those who questioned his authority and challenged his decisions. His duels and violent tendencies weren't just historical footnotes. They were a symptom of the man's complex character, one shaped by years of personal strife, and they continued to haunt his presidency. 4. Abraham Lincoln's son's ghost haunted the White House. Abraham Lincoln, one of the most revered presidents in American history, carried the weight of the nation's greatest crisis, the Civil War. But behind his strength and resolve was a personal tragedy that would haunt him throughout his life. Willie Lincoln, his beloved 11-year-old son, died of a sudden fever in 1862, leaving the Lincolns shattered. But it wasn't just the emotional toll of the loss that made this story so disturbing. After Willie's death, his mother, Mary Todd Lincoln, became convinced that Willie's ghost was haunting the White House. Some accounts suggest that she even held seances in the White House, attempting to contact her deceased son. Even more unsettling were the reports from White House staff and visitors, who claimed to have seen Willie's ghost wandering the halls. It wasn't just the Lincolns who were affected. Many believed that the White House itself was haunted by the spirit of the young boy who had died far too soon. Stories of ghostly apparitions, cold spots, and strange sounds grew throughout Lincoln's presidency. But why did this grief endure so openly, even in the midst of the Civil War? Perhaps it was because, as a nation was torn apart, Lincoln couldn't escape his own personal devastation. The ghost of Willie Lincoln was not just a haunting for the Lincolns themselves. It became a symbol of the deep personal cost of the Civil War, a war in which millions of lives would be lost and families would be torn apart. The Lincolns, too, paid a devastating price. 5. Franklin Pierce's son's death destroyed his presidency. Franklin Pierce, the 14th President of the United States, was not a man destined for greatness. His presidency, often viewed as a failure in the annals of history, was overshadowed by personal tragedy. In 1853, just days before he was set to take office, Pierce's son, Benjamin, died in a horrific train accident. The loss of his son, just 11 years old, crushed Pierce. It was a moment of unimaginable grief, one that haunted him throughout his time in office. Pierce's emotional collapse was immediate, and he became consumed by the loss. His wife, Jane Pierce, also struggled with the tragedy, sinking into a deep depression that further alienated the first family from the public. But the most disturbing part of this story isn't just the pain Pierce endured, it's the political fallout. Pierce's ability to lead was compromised by his personal sorrow. Historians argue that his failure to recover emotionally from the loss of his son led to his inability to handle the nation's growing tensions over slavery. Pierce was unable to focus on the important political issues of the time, and his presidency was marred by poor decision-making and inaction. His personal tragedy seeped into his public life, leaving a stain on his leadership that would ultimately contribute to his unpopularity. Franklin Pierce's presidency, which was already on shaky ground, fell apart as a result of his personal grief. In the years following his time in office, Pierce withdrew from politics, and his reputation remained tainted. His inability to recover from Benjamin's death ultimately led to his political irrelevance. What makes this story particularly tragic is the way his personal sorrow destroyed his political career, and possibly the fate of the nation during a critical moment in history. 6. Theodore Roosevelt's assassination attempt during a speech. Theodore Roosevelt, the 26th President of the United States, was known for his adventurous spirit and relentless energy. His strong personality and larger-than-life presence defined his time in office, but it was his near-death experience in 1912 that showed just how far Roosevelt was willing to go for his beliefs, and how nothing, not even an assassin's bullet, could stop him. On the night of October 14, 1912, Roosevelt was preparing to deliver a campaign speech in Milwaukee when he was shot in the chest by a would-be assassin, John Schrank, who had a personal vendetta against Roosevelt. The bullet lodged in Roosevelt's chest, but here's where the story gets even more bizarre. Roosevelt, ever the tough guy, insisted on finishing his speech despite being shot. He took the stage and spoke for 90 minutes, showing no sign of distress or injury. Only after finishing his speech did Roosevelt seek medical attention. The resilience Roosevelt displayed in the face of this near-fatal attack made headlines across the country. In the days following the incident, doctors discovered that the bullet had been stopped by Roosevelt's thick speech notes, which had been folded up in his coat pocket. Roosevelt's calm demeanor and refusal to show weakness solidified his reputation as a man who could survive anything, physically and politically. But what makes this story even more chilling is the fact that Roosevelt continued his campaign even after the assassination attempt. He was a man driven by unrelenting ambition, and his actions in the wake of the shooting only added to his legend. He didn't just survive an assassination attempt, he used it to his advantage, making him one of the most iconic figures in American political history. 7. John F. Kennedy's affair with Marilyn Monroe and its shocking consequences. John F. Kennedy, the 35th President of the United States, is remembered as a charismatic, charming leader who led the country through one of its most turbulent periods. But beneath the polished public image was a personal life full of scandals and secrets, none more famous or more damaging than his affair with the iconic actress Marilyn Monroe. The relationship between Kennedy and Monroe was kept under wraps, but whispers about their affair were everywhere in the early 1960s. Monroe, struggling with her own personal demons, found comfort in the arms of the president, but this was no simple love affair. Monroe was not just a woman caught in the world of Hollywood glitz. She was also a vulnerable figure whose emotional state was increasingly unstable. And as her relationship with Kennedy progressed, she became entangled in a web of political and personal intrigue. Monroe's tragic death in 1962, just months after their affair ended, raised countless questions about the nature of her relationship with Kennedy. Some conspiracy theories suggest that Monroe was silenced by powerful figures in the government or in the Kennedy family, worried that she might reveal dangerous secrets about her time with the president. Though her death was ruled as a probable overdose, the mystery surrounding her passing only fueled rumors that she had been quieted to protect Kennedy's political future. But Kennedy's involvement with Monroe wasn't just about personal scandal. It had massive political implications. As the Cold War loomed over the United States, the president's relationship with Monroe had the potential to undermine his political authority. The affair, combined with the mystery surrounding Monroe's death, led to widespread speculation about the Kennedy family secrets that would never fully be revealed. 8. Lyndon B. Johnson's secret power grab after JFK's assassination. On November 22, 1963, President John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas, and his death would forever alter the trajectory of American history. But the moment JFK was shot, Lyndon B. Johnson, his vice president, was suddenly thrust into the most powerful position in the world. However, what's not widely known is the dark undercurrent of political maneuvering that followed JFK's assassination, an event that many believe was orchestrated by LBJ himself to gain the presidency. Johnson's rise to power was anything but smooth. In the months leading up to Kennedy's assassination, LBJ's political future was uncertain, and his relationship with Kennedy was marked by tension. Despite being Kennedy's vice president, Johnson was constantly at odds with the administration, feeling slighted and disrespected by the Kennedy family. There were whispers of discontent between the two men, and many believe LBJ saw the presidency as his only true path to power. When the news of Kennedy's assassination broke, Johnson was in the midst of a whirlwind, but he was not just a passive observer. Some historians argue that LBJ saw JFK's death as his opportunity, an opportunity he had been waiting for. He moved quickly to seize control, ensuring that he would be sworn in as president immediately after the assassination. Johnson's swift actions raised eyebrows, with some claiming that he manipulated the situation to secure his own future in office. Despite his success in securing the presidency, the mysterious circumstances surrounding JFK's assassination continue to plague Johnson's legacy. Many conspiracy theories suggest that LBJ may have known more than he let on, and that his power grab wasn't just opportunistic but calculated. Johnson's presidency, shaped by the shadow of suspicion, was marked by his rapid rise to power and the grief of a nation that never fully trusted his legitimacy. 9. Richard Nixon's paranoia and the Watergate tapes. Richard Nixon's presidency was one of the most turbulent in U.S. history, but it wasn't just his political decisions that led to his downfall, it was his obsession with power and his increasing paranoia. Nixon's secret recordings, known as the Watergate tapes, became the smoking gun that exposed his involvement in the Watergate scandal, which would ultimately lead to his resignation. But what makes the Watergate tapes particularly chilling is the window they provide into Nixon's psyche. The tapes, secretly recorded conversations between Nixon and his staff, reveal a man deeply paranoid about his political enemies. Nixon went to great lengths to cover up the break-in at the Democratic National Committee headquarters and, more disturbingly, to destroy anyone who stood in his way. The recordings don't just show a president covering up a crime, they expose a man obsessed with power, willing to bend the rules and manipulate the system to maintain control. Even more disturbing is the paranoia that comes through in Nixon's voice on the tapes. He constantly talks about how his enemies are plotting against him and how he needs to neutralize them. His actions, driven by this fear, weren't just about protecting himself. They were about eliminating anyone who could potentially threaten his authority. It was a chilling glimpse into the mind of a leader who was willing to stop at nothing to maintain his grip on power, even if it meant betraying the very ideals he swore to uphold. The tapes were a turning point in American politics, showing the darker side of presidential power. Nixon's resignation in 1974 was a direct result of the tapes, but the questions they raised about his character and his actions lingered for years. Nixon's legacy would forever be defined by paranoia and betrayal, casting a long shadow over American politics. 10. Bill Clinton's secret affairs beyond Monica Lewinsky. When Bill Clinton's affair with Monica Lewinsky became public in 1998, it shocked the nation and almost led to his impeachment. But what many don't realize is that Lewinsky was only one piece of the puzzle of Clinton's secret life. Throughout his presidency, Clinton was rumored to have had multiple extramarital affairs with other women, many of whom were high-profile figures. The Lewinsky scandal was a disaster for Clinton, but it was far from the only affair that threatened to destroy his political career. While the media fixated on Lewinsky, the public never fully knew about the other relationships Clinton had been involved in. Clinton's charm and charisma masked the true depth of his personal indiscretions, but behind closed doors, he had engaged in a series of sexual relationships with women, often using his position of power to hide his actions. What makes this particularly disturbing is the extent to which Clinton went to cover up his affairs. He repeatedly lied under oath, denying his involvement with Lewinsky and others, and this deception ultimately led to his impeachment. Clinton's actions raised uncomfortable questions about abuse of power and personal morality, and while he was acquitted in the Senate, his reputation was forever tarnished by the scandals. The true extent of Clinton's extramarital relationships was buried in the media frenzy surrounding the Lewinsky affair. Many of the women who were involved with him were silenced, and their stories became footnotes in a much larger narrative. Clinton's personal life, shrouded in secrecy and deceit, became one of the darkest chapters in American political history. 11. George W. Bush's Iraq War, Lies, Revenge, and the WMDs. In March of 2003, the United States, led by President George W. Bush, began its invasion of Iraq. The official reason for the invasion was the belief that Iraq possessed weapons of mass destruction, WMDs, which posed a threat to the safety and security of the United States. But the truth behind the invasion is far more complex and far darker than what was presented to the public. From the very start, Bush and his administration built their case for war around the premise that Iraq was actively developing WMDs, and that it was only a matter of time before these weapons would be used against the United States. The intelligence reports, however, were later proven to be deeply flawed. As the years went on, it became clear that Iraq did not have any active weapons of mass destruction, but the invasion continued under the pretense of national security. But here's where the story gets even more complicated and disturbing. George W. Bush was the son of former President George H.W. Bush, who had served as president during the First Gulf War. Many believe that the decision to invade Iraq was, in part, a personal vendetta against Iraqi President Saddam Hussein, who had allegedly attempted to assassinate George H.W. Bush in 1993. For years, there were rumors that the real reason for the invasion wasn't the threat of WMDs, but rather an effort to avenge the Bush family and remove a long-standing enemy from power. What makes this even more unsettling is the unprecedented secrecy surrounding the lead-up to the invasion. The Bush administration manipulated intelligence reports, exaggerating the threat posed by Iraq to the United States and pushing a narrative that would justify the war to the American public. The invasion was sold as a necessary step in the war on terror, but it quickly spiraled into a military quagmire that would last for years. Hundreds of thousands of lives were lost, and the political and social ramifications of the war continue to be felt today. As time passed, it became clear that the entire justification for the Iraq War was based on lies that would have massive consequences for the US and the world. The legacy of the Iraq War remains deeply controversial, with many questioning the true motivations behind the invasion. Was it about fighting terrorism, or was it about family revenge and political power? What we know for sure is that the war left behind a trail of destruction, and that the legacy of George W. Bush will always be intertwined with the deception and death caused by this disastrous conflict. 12. Barack Obama's college years, rumors and relationships with men. Barack Obama's rise to the presidency in 2008 was hailed as a monumental moment in American history. The first African American president, a beacon of hope, and a symbol of change. But beyond his public life and his political career, there are whispers about Obama's private life that have persisted over the years. The most intriguing, and possibly the most uncomfortable, rumors surround his college years at Occidental College, Columbia University, and Harvard Law School. Throughout Obama's time in college, there have been persistent rumors and speculation about his relationships with men. These rumors were fueled by Obama's early writings, including his autobiography, Dreams from My Father, in which he spoke candidly about his struggles with his identity and his search for belonging. In the book, Obama wrote about his relationships with close friends, some of whom were men, and his feelings of being torn between his black heritage and his Western upbringing. But what really raised eyebrows were the accounts from some of Obama's classmates and friends who claimed that, during his time at Occidental and Columbia, Obama had intimate relationships with men. Some even suggested that his relationship with one of his close friends at Occidental was more than just friendship, but rather romantic in nature. These rumors have never been definitively proven, but they have persisted over the years, and the speculation has only intensified as Obama's political career skyrocketed. What makes this all the more fascinating and uncomfortable is how much Obama's image as a political leader has been shaped by the public's perception of his personal life. Obama, a man of calm charisma and diplomatic rhetoric, has always carefully crafted an image of himself that resonates with millions of people. But in his early years, before he became the presidential candidate, the private Obama was much more complicated. Could it be that his personal relationships with men were kept hidden to preserve his public image as a family man, married to Michelle Obama, with 2 daughters? For years, Obama's past was carefully guarded, with his team going to great lengths to maintain the image of a perfect family man. But as his presidency unfolded, these whispers about his early relationships continued to surface. Obama's relationship with men during his college years remains one of the most intriguing and possibly unanswered questions of his early life. Did these relationships shape the man he would become? Or were they simply a part of a personal history that Obama wanted to keep buried for the sake of his political career? It's a mystery that still lingers today, raising questions about identity, power, and public perception. 13. Lyndon B. Johnson's secret power grab after JFK's assassination. The date is November 22, 1963, a day that would go down in history as one of the most shocking and tragic moments in American politics. President John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas, leaving the nation in a state of shock and grief. But within the chaos of that day, as the world mourned the loss of a charismatic leader, a power struggle was unfolding behind closed doors. At the heart of it all was Lyndon B. Johnson, the vice president, who found himself suddenly catapulted into the presidency. But was Johnson simply a man thrust into power by circumstance? Or did he orchestrate the events that brought him to the White House? Johnson's rise to power was not just a matter of fate, it was a strategic power grab years in the making. Known for his ruthless political maneuvering and his thirst for power, LBJ was often described as a man who would stop at nothing to get what he wanted. From the very beginning of his political career, Johnson was obsessed with becoming the most powerful man in the country. And while he had served as vice president under Kennedy, his relationship with Kennedy was far from perfect. At the time of JFK's assassination, Johnson was traveling with the presidential motorcade in Dallas. But in an ironic twist of fate, he was not even in the car with Kennedy when the shots rang out. He was in the backseat of a different vehicle, traveling just behind Kennedy's, in a tense and awkward situation. As the shots were fired, Johnson's life changed in an instant. He was rushed to Air Force One, where he would be sworn in as president on the tarmac, minutes after JFK's death. However, the story doesn't end there. What's often left out of the official narrative is just how aggressively Johnson worked behind the scenes to ensure that he would seize power immediately. Even as Kennedy's body was being rushed back to Washington, Johnson's team was already working to consolidate power, ensuring that he would not just step into the role of president, but that he would control the agenda moving forward. Johnson's advisors knew that public opinion was fragile in the wake of the assassination. There was a deep fear that the nation might lose confidence in the government, especially with such an abrupt and tragic loss of leadership. Johnson was a master at playing the political game, and he wasted no time in asserting his authority, meeting with key officials and political allies as soon as he boarded Air Force One. What is most disturbing about this power grab is how Johnson used the grief and the shock surrounding Kennedy's assassination to manipulate the situation to his advantage. His swift actions in the wake of the tragedy were not just about stepping into a leadership role, they were about shaping the political landscape to ensure that he would remain in control. As Johnson returned to Washington, there were whispers of how quickly he was making decisions and taking control of the situation. It seemed that he was not just grieving the loss of a colleague and a friend, but that he was also preparing for the immense political challenge ahead. By the time Johnson was officially sworn in as president, the political groundwork had already been laid. His ability to secure key alliances and make quick decisions put him in a position where he wasn't just a placeholder president. He was the man who would lead the nation through the turmoil that followed Kennedy's assassination. What makes this story even more sinister is the possibility that Johnson may have known more about the circumstances surrounding Kennedy's death than he ever let on. In the years following the assassination, conspiracy theories began to surface, some suggesting that Johnson's rise to power was not entirely coincidental. Did LBJ know about a plot against Kennedy? Was he involved in any way in orchestrating the events that led to the assassination? While there is no direct evidence to support these claims, the suspicion that Johnson was not entirely a passive player in the events of that day is something that haunts his legacy to this day. After taking office, Johnson immediately set out to make his mark on history. He pushed through landmark legislation, including the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, but many historians believe that these achievements were as much about securing his political future as they were about fulfilling his goals for the nation. His aggressive political tactics during this time set the stage for his legacy as one of the most controversial and complex presidents in American history. Johnson's presidency was marked by constant challenges, from the escalating Vietnam War to his complex relationship with Congress and the American public. But no matter what obstacles he faced, he remained a deeply polarizing figure, with his rise to power always hanging in the background as a reminder of the hidden truths that surrounded his time in office. His swift rise to power was not just a matter of tragic timing. It was the work of a man determined to seize control, no matter the cost. 14. Richard Nixon's paranoia and the Watergate tapes. When we think of Richard Nixon, we often think of the Watergate scandal, the defining moment of his presidency that led to his resignation in 1974. But what's often overlooked is the deeply disturbing psychological state that drove Nixon to make the decisions that would ultimately destroy his political career. Nixon's paranoia and obsession with power were not just traits of a man under pressure. They were fundamental aspects of his character, shaping the way he interacted with those around him. The story of Watergate begins long before the break-in at the Democratic National Committee headquarters in 1972. Nixon's suspicion of the media, his political enemies, and even his own staff had been growing for years. Nixon believed that there was a vast conspiracy against him, and he was determined to fight back at any cost. His obsession with surveillance and secret recordings led him to install a taping system in the White House, believing that he needed to record every conversation to protect himself from future attacks. The tapes, which became known as the Watergate tapes, are perhaps the most chilling aspect of Nixon's presidency. These tapes revealed the depths of his paranoia, as Nixon and his aides discussed ways to undermine their political opponents and manipulate the media. The tapes also showed Nixon's growing sense of desperation as he tried to cover up the break-in and avoid any consequences. He believed that if he could just control the narrative, he could maintain his grip on power. But as the tapes began to be revealed to the public, they exposed Nixon's most damaging secret, his willingness to do anything to hold on to power, even if it meant breaking the law. What's most disturbing about the tapes isn't just the illegal actions Nixon took, it's the psychological portrait they reveal. Nixon's fear of losing power led him to make decisions that were driven by paranoia, not logic. His belief in a vast conspiracy against him made him ruthless, willing to manipulate others, deceive the public, and undermine the very fabric of American democracy. The tapes don't just expose Nixon's involvement in the Watergate scandal. They reveal a man who was losing control, grasping at whatever means he could to protect his legacy. The exposure of these tapes was the beginning of the end for Nixon. In the face of overwhelming evidence of his wrongdoing, he had no choice but to resign in 1974, becoming the first U.S. president to ever step down from office. But what's most disturbing about Nixon's downfall is that it wasn't just about the break-in, it was about the mindset that led to it. Nixon's paranoia, his obsession with power, and his willingness to destroy anyone who stood in his way made him one of the most controversial and dangerous figures in American political history. 15. Bill Clinton's secret affairs beyond Monica Lewinsky. Bill Clinton's presidency was defined by his charisma, his political savvy, and his scandalous personal life. While the Monica Lewinsky affair was the one that brought him closest to political ruin, the truth about Clinton's extramarital affairs runs much deeper. His relationship with Monica Lewinsky became the focus of an intense national scandal, but what the public didn't know was that Clinton had multiple affairs during his time in office, some of which were with high-profile women, affairs that were carefully concealed by a team of protectors working around the clock to protect his image. Clinton was often described as a master manipulator, someone who could charm anyone he met. His ability to win over the public was so powerful that it almost masked the more disturbing aspects of his personal life. While Clinton's relationship with Lewinsky was the most publicly known, his history of sexual liaisons went back much further. One of the most well-known of these affairs was with Jennifer Flowers, a former Arkansas state employee, who claimed to have had a 12-year affair with Clinton during his time as governor. Clinton denied it publicly for years, but the truth came out during the 1992 presidential campaign, as Flowers went public with tapes of their conversations. Yet, Clinton's infidelities didn't stop with Flowers. There were several other women who came forward with accusations, including Kathleen Willey, who alleged that Clinton had assaulted her while she was a volunteer in the White House, and Paula Jones, who filed a sexual harassment lawsuit against him in 1994. The media and political opponents focused heavily on these claims, often portraying Clinton as a man who was unfaithful to his wife, Hillary Clinton, but the true extent of his behavior was much more complicated. What's most disturbing about Clinton's affairs is the lengths to which he went to cover them up. There was a coordinated campaign to silence women who spoke out about him, using a combination of intimidation, legal action, and media manipulation to control the narrative. Clinton's team tried to paint these women as liars or attention seekers, dismissing their claims with a combination of charm and deception. The Lewinsky scandal, of course, came to define Clinton's presidency, but it's important to remember that his sexual behavior was not confined to one affair. Clinton's ability to compartmentalize his personal and political lives, and the way he was able to manipulate public perception to shield himself from the consequences of his actions, is a testament to his political acumen, but also to the dark side of his character. Clinton's extramarital affairs also had a lasting impact on his relationship with Hillary Clinton. Throughout the scandal, Hillary stood by her husband, publicly defending him and accusing his critics of trying to bring him down. But behind closed doors, the pressure of the scandals took a toll on their marriage. Hillary's role as First Lady became even more complex as she faced her own challenges in maintaining a public image while navigating her husband's betrayals. Clinton's actions not only shattered his personal life but also left a mark on his presidency, leaving the nation to wonder what might have been if his personal conduct had been less clouded by deceit and infidelity. 16. George H.W. Bush's alleged relationship with male political figures. While George H.W. Bush was largely celebrated for his role in leading the U.S. through the end of the Cold War and his presidency, there are whispers and rumors about his personal life that have never been fully explored. One of the most persistent rumors that has emerged in recent years is about his close relationships with male political figures, relationships that some have speculated may have been more than just political. The first major whispers came in the early 1990s, when high-profile individuals began to question the closeness of Bush's friendships with various male members of his inner circle. The most notable among these was James Baker, a close advisor and one of Bush's most trusted confidants during his presidency. Rumors suggested that their relationship was far more intimate than what was publicly acknowledged. Both men were known to share an unusual level of closeness, and their private meetings and exchanges were seen by some as more than just professional. What makes these rumors particularly unsettling is the way they were silenced. Sources close to the Bush administration quickly dismissed any notion of a relationship, insisting that it was simply the product of political attacks or the misinterpretation of a close working relationship. However, those who worked closest with the Bushes claimed there was a tension between the public and private aspects of the Bush family, and that some details of George H.W. Bush's personal life were being deliberately kept out of the public eye. One of the most disturbing aspects of these rumors is the way the Bush family worked to ensure that these issues never reached the public consciousness. George H.W. Bush was seen as a pillar of traditional American values, a family man who represented the ideals of hard work and dedication. To have these rumors about his personal life would have been a public relations nightmare. The media and his political allies worked tirelessly to maintain the image of Bush as a steadfast family man. All the while, rumors of a secret life lingered just beneath the surface. As time passed, these rumors became part of the larger narrative surrounding the Bush family, a family whose public image seemed to be constantly at odds with the secrets it tried to hide. The truth about George H.W. Bush's relationships with male political figures may never fully be known, but the fact that these rumors have persisted for so long is a testament to the mystique that surrounded the man, and the lengths to which political dynasties will go to protect their most personal secrets. 17. Andrew Johnson's impeachment drama and his public struggles. Andrew Johnson, the 17th President of the United States, became one of the most controversial figures in American political history, not for his achievements, but for the chaos that followed after the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. Johnson, a Southern Democrat, became president at a time of extreme political upheaval and was tasked with overseeing the difficult process of Reconstruction after the Civil War. However, Johnson's presidency is most remembered for the dramatic impeachment proceedings that nearly led to his removal from office, an event that, in many ways, set the stage for future conflicts between the presidency and Congress. It all began when Johnson attempted to undermine the Reconstruction Acts, which were designed to rebuild the South and ensure the rights of newly freed African Americans. The battle over Reconstruction policy wasn't just political, it was personal. Johnson's Southern roots and his deep resentment toward the radical Republicans in Congress created a deep rift that would come to define his presidency. In 1867, Johnson's dismissal of Edwin M. Stanton, the Secretary of War, would be the flashpoint that led to his impeachment. Stanton, a staunch ally of the radical Republicans, was at odds with Johnson's policies, and when Johnson tried to remove him from office and replace him with someone more sympathetic to his views, it broke the law. The Tenure of Office Act, which had been passed by Congress to limit the president's power to remove officials without Senate approval, was at the center of the crisis. Johnson's defiance of this law led Congress to impeach him in 1868, accusing him of violating the act. The impeachment trial that followed was a spectacle, with Johnson's fate hanging in the balance. The Senate trial played out like a political theater, with accusations and counterarguments flying back and forth. What's particularly chilling about Johnson's impeachment is the personal nature of the attack. Johnson was not just being impeached for his actions as president, he was being punished for his defiance of Congress and his refusal to bend to the will of the majority. The trial became a battle of wills, with the future of the presidency itself at stake. In the end, Johnson was acquitted by a single vote in the Senate, but the damage had already been done. His presidency was effectively crippled by the impeachment, and he never regained the political power he once had. The incident also set a dangerous precedent, highlighting the extreme political tensions between the executive and legislative branches, and it left a scar on Johnson's legacy that would last for generations. What's especially disturbing is how Johnson's personal grudges against Congress, his anger, his defiance, and his deep-seated belief that he was the only one who could heal the nation, led to an impeachment crisis that never fully resolved. His actions ultimately led to the weakening of the presidency, and his inability to find compromise sealed his fate in the history books. 18. Ulysses S. Grant's alcoholism kept secret from the public. Ulysses S. Grant is remembered as one of the greatest generals in American history, his leadership during the Civil War helping to secure Union victory. However, his time as president, 18th President of the United States, was marked by personal and political turmoil, much of it stemming from a secret that Grant worked hard to conceal: his struggle with alcoholism. While history often glorifies Grant as a heroic figure, the reality of his personal demons paints a more complicated picture. Grant's battle with alcoholism started long before he entered the White House. During his early military career, Grant's drinking habits became notorious among his superiors. His superiors often found it difficult to work with him, as his drinking sometimes caused him to miss crucial assignments and hurt his performance in battle. Despite these struggles, Grant's military genius ultimately propelled him to the rank of General-in-Chief of the Union Army, and he became a national hero for his leadership during the Civil War. However, once he took office in 1869, Grant's personal life became a hidden burden that he worked to keep away from the public eye. Throughout his 2 terms as president, Grant's alcoholism was carefully concealed by his advisors, as it was seen as a political liability. There were times when he would disappear for days, retreating to his home and retreating from public view, only for his staff to cover up his absences with vague explanations. Grant's close circle of friends and colleagues often protected him from scrutiny, and they tried to shield the public from any knowledge of his struggles with addiction. But despite these efforts to protect Grant's image, the truth eventually came out. During his presidency, Grant's drinking was linked to some poor decision-making, including his involvement in some of the more scandalous moments of his administration, such as the Credit Mobilier scandal and the whiskey ring scandal. These scandals tainted Grant's presidency and caused significant damage to his political reputation. However, it was clear that Grant's personal demons were in large part responsible for his political failings. His addiction made him more susceptible to manipulation and poor judgment, and it ultimately undermined the work he had done as a general and as president. What makes Grant's story especially disturbing is how much of his personal struggle was kept hidden from the public. The press and his political allies were complicit in covering up his drinking problem, as they feared the damage it would do to the public perception of his leadership. The fact that Grant's personal life was hidden in plain sight, that the public saw only the image of a steadfast president, while the reality was far more troubling, adds an unsettling layer to his legacy. Grant's presidency is remembered for its corruption, but his struggle with alcoholism is perhaps the most personal and heartbreaking aspect of his time in office, showing how a man of great strength in battle could be so easily undone by his own vices. 19. Harry S. Truman's decision to drop the atomic bomb, the secret behind the decision. In August 1945, President Harry S. Truman made one of the most controversial decisions in modern history, the decision to drop atomic bombs on the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The bombs, which unleashed unimaginable destruction and loss of life, were the first and only use of nuclear weapons in warfare, forever changing the course of history. But what's even more unsettling than the bombs themselves is the secretive nature of Truman's decision-making process and the moral implications of using such a powerful weapon. The story begins in the final days of World War II, as the Allied forces were closing in on Nazi Germany in Europe. With Germany's surrender in May 1945, the focus quickly shifted to Japan, which refused to surrender despite facing certain defeat. The question became not whether Japan could be defeated, but how? The conventional military strategy, an invasion of Japan, was seen as potentially disastrous, with estimates of millions of casualties on both sides. Truman and his advisors were faced with a terrible choice: continue the fight with a bloody invasion, or use a weapon of mass destruction to force Japan's surrender. But the decision to use atomic bombs wasn't made in a vacuum. In the months leading up to the bombings, the US had been conducting top-secret experiments under the Manhattan Project, with scientists racing to develop the world's first atomic weapon. Truman, who became president after the sudden death of Franklin D. Roosevelt, was informed of the project's success after taking office, and he was deeply divided on the decision to use the bomb. Some advisors, including military officials, pushed for its use to end the war quickly, while others were deeply concerned about the long-term consequences of such a weapon. What makes Truman's decision especially disturbing is the secrecy surrounding it. Truman was not the first president to understand the power of the atomic bomb. Roosevelt had initiated the Manhattan Project, but Truman was the one who had to make the fateful decision to use it. The American public was kept in the dark about the true nature of the bomb and its implications for the world. Truman's inner circle discussed the use of the bomb with a sense of urgency and pragmatism, but the moral considerations seemed secondary. Truman himself was torn between the desire to end the war and the knowledge that the use of such a weapon would change the world forever. The bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki killed an estimated 200,000 people, many of them civilians. The immediate devastation was horrific, but the long-term effects, radiation sickness, genetic mutations, and a legacy of nuclear war were far more widespread. The bombings raise questions about humanity's ability to control its own destructive power, and the ethical implications of using nuclear weapons have been debated ever since. Truman's decision to drop the bombs was, at the time, seen as a necessary evil, a way to end the war quickly and save American lives. But in the years that followed, Truman faced criticism for his decision. Some historians argue that Japan was already on the verge of surrender and that the bombings were unnecessary. Others contend that the bombings were part of a larger geopolitical strategy to assert US dominance over the Soviet Union in the early stages of the Cold War. Truman himself, in the years after the bombings, expressed regret about the use of nuclear weapons, but he defended the decision as a means of bringing about the end of the war. What's even more disturbing is how the use of atomic weapons became a symbol of American power in the years to come. Truman's decision set a dangerous precedent, leading to an arms race between the United States and the Soviet Union during the Cold War. The development and proliferation of nuclear weapons became a central issue in global politics, and the world was forced to confront the reality that the same country that had fought for freedom and democracy was also the country that had unleashed the ultimate weapon of mass destruction. Truman's legacy is forever tied to this decision. And the question remains, was it worth it? The use of the atomic bomb may have ended the war more quickly, but it also opened the door to a new era of global fear and uncertainty. Truman's choice to unleash this devastating power has haunted the world ever since, leaving a dark stain on the history of the 20th century. 20. Woodrow Wilson's secret stroke and the power behind the throne. Woodrow Wilson, the 28th President of the United States, is remembered for his leadership during World War I and his efforts to create the League of Nations. But behind his presidency lies a hidden truth, one that, if known at the time, would have shocked the nation. In 1919, just after his efforts to negotiate the Treaty of Versailles, Wilson suffered a massive stroke that left him physically incapacitated. Yet, despite his inability to function fully as president, Wilson continued to serve in office, with his wife, Edith Wilson, effectively taking on the role of acting president. The stroke occurred in October 1919, after Wilson returned from Europe, exhausted by the grueling peace negotiations that followed the war. At the time, Wilson was in the midst of a national tour to rally support for the Treaty of Versailles, a key part of his vision for a post-war world order. But after his stroke, Wilson was unable to carry out his duties, suffering from severe physical and mental impairments. Yet, to the public, nothing seemed amiss. The Wilsons kept the true nature of his condition a secret, and instead of informing the American people, Edith Wilson took on a role that was unprecedented in American history. She became the de facto leader of the United States. For months, Edith Wilson handled all of her husband's correspondence, met with political leaders, and made key decisions on his behalf. While Wilson was still technically president, it was his wife who ran the country behind the scenes. She managed his schedule, made decisions about foreign policy, and even advised Congress on key legislative matters. This constitutional crisis, in which the public was unaware of the extent of Wilson's illness, raised serious questions about the checks and balances in the US government. Was it right for Edith Wilson to wield this much power in the absence of the president? Or was this an act of desperation on her part to protect her husband's legacy? What's even more unsettling is how the American public remained completely in the dark about Wilson's condition. At a time when political transparency was essential, Wilson's illness and the secrecy surrounding it were a breach of trust. The fact that a wife, and not a constitutional successor, was the one making decisions about US policy is one of the most disturbing episodes in American political history. The consequences of this constitutional crisis were far-reaching, and they raised questions about the role of transparency, the limits of presidential power, and the ability of political spouses to step into positions of authority without public consent. The true extent of Wilson's incapacity wasn't revealed until years later, and the incident became a key reason for reform in the way the U.S. handled presidential disabilities. This episode of American history serves as a chilling reminder of just how fragile the balance of power can be, and how even a president's physical limitations can be hidden from the world to protect an image of authority. 21. John F. Kennedy Jr.'s mysterious death and the conspiracy theories surrounding it. On July 16, 1999, the world was shocked when John F. Kennedy Jr., the son of the assassinated president, died in a mysterious plane crash off the coast of Martha's Vineyard. At 38, Kennedy had been a rising star in American society, admired for his charm, good looks, and his advocacy for the common man. But it wasn't just the tragic loss of a beloved public figure that captured the world's attention. It was the strange and unexplained circumstances surrounding his death. Kennedy had been flying with his wife, Carolyn Bessette, and her sister, Lauren Bessette, when their small private plane crashed into the Atlantic Ocean. The plane was headed to Martha's Vineyard, a popular vacation spot for the Kennedy family. Kennedy, a licensed pilot, was known for flying in rough conditions, but the weather on that night was unusually foggy and overcast, and many believe that these conditions played a major role in the crash. But the more unsettling details began to surface in the aftermath, leading to widespread speculation about what really happened that night. The official cause of the crash was determined to be pilot error, with the National Transportation Safety Board citing disorientation caused by the poor visibility. But this explanation did little to quell the numerous conspiracy theories that began to emerge. Some theorists believe that the crash was not an accident but the result of foul play, with rumors of sabotage circulating in the media. Given Kennedy's high-profile family background, some speculated that his death could have been linked to political motives, or even that he had become a target due to his growing popularity and potential future political ambitions. Adding fuel to the fire were the mysterious details surrounding the recovery of the bodies and the wreckage. Kennedy's body was found several days later, and the delay led many to believe that there were inconsistencies in the recovery process. Moreover, some questioned why the plane's black box, a critical tool for determining the cause of the crash, was never recovered or disclosed to the public. These unanswered questions only served to heighten the growing sense of mystery and speculation. But what makes Kennedy's death even more bizarre is the legacy of conspiracy theories that have followed him and his family for decades. The Kennedy family has long been the subject of countless conspiracy theories, many surrounding the assassination of JFK himself. Some people have suggested that the death of John F. Kennedy Jr. was not a simple accident, but rather a strategic move to eliminate a potential political rival. While there is no concrete evidence to support these claims, the fact that so many questions remain unanswered only adds to the eerie aura of mystery surrounding the Kennedy family. Kennedy's death at such a young age, and under such suspicious circumstances, cemented him as a tragic figure in American history. He was not just the son of a beloved president, but a man whose life seemed to be cut short just as he was beginning to make his own mark on the world. The fact that so many questions remain about his death makes his story even more tragic and mysterious, leaving us to wonder if we will ever truly know the truth about what happened that fateful night in 1999. 22. Jimmy Carter and the Iran hostage crisis. Was he sabotaged? In 1979, President Jimmy Carter was thrust into one of the most difficult situations of his presidency, the Iran hostage crisis. 52 American diplomats and citizens were taken hostage by Iranian militants, sparking a national crisis that would last for 444 days. The world watched as Carter, a president known for his humanitarian values, faced one of the most embarrassing and politically damaging challenges of his time in office. But what if the situation was not just the result of geopolitical tensions, but the product of deliberate sabotage. The timeline of the Iran hostage crisis has always seemed strange. The U.S. Embassy in Tehran was stormed in November 1979, and the hostages were held by Iranian militants who were supporters of the Iranian Revolution. The world waited anxiously as Carter's administration tried, and ultimately failed, to negotiate their release. Carter's image as a strong, capable leader took a huge hit as the hostages were held for months, with no clear resolution in sight. But what if there were forces within the U.S. government, or even outside, who actively sabotaged Carter's efforts? This theory has been hotly debated, and some believe that certain political figures or military-industrial interests wanted to see Carter fail. According to conspiracy theorists, the hostage situation was prolonged intentionally to undermine Carter's presidency and weaken his chances of re-election in 1980. Some have even suggested that elements of the U.S. intelligence community and the Carter administration's political opponents worked behind the scenes to prevent the hostages from being released before the election, as a way of ensuring Carter's defeat by his rival, Ronald Reagan. There's more to this story than just speculation. In the final days of Carter's presidency, just hours after Reagan was sworn in, the hostages were released. The timing of this release was too precise to ignore, and many political analysts have questioned whether the hostages were intentionally kept in captivity to affect the outcome of the 1980 election. Some even point to Reagan's connections with Iranian officials, suggesting that the Reagan campaign had secretly made promises to Iran in exchange for their cooperation in delaying the release of the hostages until after the election. This theory, known as the October surprise theory, remains a mystery to this day, with many asking whether Carter was the victim of a political conspiracy designed to prevent him from gaining the upper hand. What makes this theory even more chilling is the legacy of the Iran hostage crisis. The event remains one of the most defining moments of Carter's presidency, casting a long shadow over his time in office. The fact that the hostages were released immediately after Reagan took office raises serious questions about the true nature of the crisis, and whether Carter's political enemies used it as a tool to bring down his presidency. 23. Ronald Reagan's Alzheimer's diagnosis hidden from the public. Ronald Reagan, the 40th President of the United States, was revered as a leader who helped end the Cold War and guided America through a period of great economic prosperity. He was known for his charisma, his ability to connect with the American people, and his firm stance against the Soviet Union. But what most Americans didn't know was that, by the end of his presidency, Reagan was suffering from Alzheimer's disease, a diagnosis that would not be revealed to the public until years later. Reagan's battle with Alzheimer's began while he was still in office. The first signs of the disease were subtle: occasional lapses in memory, confusion, and difficulty remembering names. But over time, these symptoms became more pronounced. Reagan's public speeches became increasingly disjointed, and his once sharp memory seemed to fade. Yet, despite the growing evidence of his decline, his staff and advisors worked tirelessly to conceal the true nature of his illness from the public. In fact, Reagan's Alzheimer's diagnosis was kept a secret for much of his second term. His wife, Nancy Reagan, was deeply protective of him, and she worked closely with his staff to make sure that the public did not learn of his condition. Many of Reagan's speeches and public appearances were carefully choreographed, and his staff would often give him written notes and briefings in advance to ensure he didn't forget important information. The extent of his cognitive decline was hidden behind the polished image of a man who had become a symbol of strength and leadership. But behind the scenes, Reagan's condition was worsening. According to many sources close to the White House, Nancy Reagan played a central role in managing the day-to-day affairs of the presidency, often making decisions on her husband's behalf without his direct involvement. While Reagan was still technically in charge, it became increasingly clear that he was no longer capable of performing his duties as president. This raises a deeply disturbing question. How much power did Nancy Reagan have in the White House? Did she, in effect, become the de facto president, quietly pulling the strings behind the scenes while the world remained unaware of her husband's condition? The secrecy surrounding Reagan's diagnosis raises serious questions about transparency and the role of the media. The American public was not informed about the true state of their leader's health, and many argue that this lack of transparency undermined the democratic process. Had the public known about Reagan's condition, would he have been able to serve out his second term? And if the illness had been revealed earlier, would the American people have had the opportunity to choose a new leader, someone who could have been better suited to deal with the challenges facing the country at the time? It wasn't until 1994, years after Reagan had left office, that he publicly announced his diagnosis in a letter to the American people. By that time, the disease had already taken a severe toll on his health. In the letter, Reagan acknowledged that his memory had begun to fail, and he expressed his hope that his experience with Alzheimer's would help raise awareness of the disease. But the revelation came too late to answer the many questions that had been raised during his presidency. Reagan's Alzheimer's diagnosis has become one of the most controversial aspects of his legacy. While he is still remembered as one of the most iconic presidents in American history, the secrecy surrounding his illness leaves a shadow over his time in office. It raises questions about the ethical responsibilities of those in power, and about the balance between protecting a leader's dignity and ensuring that the public is fully informed about the health of their elected officials. 24. Andrew Jackson's legacy of violence and the Trail of Tears. Andrew Jackson, the 7th President of the United States, is remembered as a heroic figure in American history, one of the men who helped lead the country through the War of 1812 and who strengthened the office of the presidency. However, Jackson's legacy is deeply tainted by his violent actions and his policies toward Native Americans, which led to one of the darkest chapters in U.S. history, the Trail of Tears. Jackson's views on Native Americans were not just discriminatory, they were openly hostile. As a general, he led military campaigns against the Creek and Seminole nations, and as president, he championed the policy of Indian removal. The Indian Removal Act of 1830, which Jackson signed into law, forced thousands of Native Americans from their ancestral lands in the southeastern United States to lands west of the Mississippi River. This forced migration, known as the Trail of Tears, resulted in the deaths of thousands of Native Americans, many from disease, malnutrition, and exposure. What's even more disturbing is Jackson's personal role in the policy. He saw Native American tribes as barriers to American expansion and was determined to remove them from the lands he believed should belong to white settlers. He argued that the policy was in the best interest of the Native Americans, but it was clear that it was primarily driven by a desire to make room for the growing American economy. Jackson's personal hatred for Native Americans was evident in his public speeches and his treatment of the tribes he forced to relocate. He prided himself on being a man of action and strength, but the violence of his policies cannot be overlooked. The legacy of the Trail of Tears is not just a dark chapter in Jackson's presidency, it's a stain on American history. Thousands of Native Americans were displaced from their land, and many died on the long, treacherous journey to Oklahoma. The cultural destruction of these tribes was immeasurable, and the consequences of Jackson's policies continue to affect Native American communities today. The deep emotional and physical trauma caused by the Trail of Tears remains a painful reminder of the violence and inhumanity that were often overlooked in the pursuit of national expansion. What's most disturbing about Jackson's legacy is how it has been romanticized over the years. Jackson is often remembered as a war hero and a champion of the common man, but his treatment of Native Americans is frequently downplayed or ignored. The fact that Jackson remains one of the most celebrated figures in American history, despite his role in one of the most horrific episodes in the nation's past, shows how deeply embedded these injustices are in American memory. Jackson's presidency was marked by violence, cruelty, and a complete disregard for the rights of Native Americans. The Trail of Tears is a reminder that history is often written by the victors, and that the suffering of marginalized groups can be conveniently erased from the official narrative. Jackson's violent policies created a legacy that continues to haunt American society, and it's a legacy that's still being reckoned with today. 25. Bill Clinton's secret meetings with the mafia. Bill Clinton's presidency, marked by his charm and political maneuvering, was also shrouded in controversy, much of it revolving around scandals and rumors of his relationships with powerful, shadowy figures. One of the most disturbing rumors that has swirled around Clinton is his alleged ties to the mafia. While this may sound like the stuff of conspiracy theories, some of the connections and behind-the-scenes meetings suggest a far more complicated relationship between Clinton and the criminal underworld than most people realize. The rumors of Clinton's connections with organized crime first gained traction in the 1990s, when he was serving as governor of Arkansas. During this time, several members of the Clinton administration were alleged to have had dealings with individuals connected to the mob. Some even speculated that Clinton's rise to political power was facilitated by mafia connections, who saw his potential as a politician they could control. In Little Rock, Clinton's hometown, there were reports of mysterious meetings taking place between Clinton and men with mob ties. Clinton's relationship with political fixer and businessman Dan Lassiter raised many eyebrows. Lassiter was linked to the mafia and was involved in financial dealings with Clinton's administration. The two men had close personal and business relationships, and many have questioned whether Lassiter's influence in Arkansas politics helped Clinton rise to national prominence. What makes these ties particularly disturbing is the web of secrecy surrounding them. Many of Clinton's political opponents tried to expose the connections, but they were quickly dismissed as rumors or conspiracy theories. However, as time passed, more details began to emerge about Clinton's interactions with figures who were known to have mafia connections. Some reports even suggested that the mafia had provided financial support for Clinton's political campaigns, using their influence to help him win crucial elections in Arkansas. But it wasn't just Clinton's early political career that raised suspicion. There were also reports during his time in the White House about mafia figures attending private events at the Clinton residence, and even rumors of Clinton seeking their counsel on key political issues. Though no direct evidence has ever surfaced linking Clinton to the mafia, the persistent rumors and the shadowy figures associated with his career have led many to believe that his presidency was not as squeaky clean as it appeared. The idea of a sitting U.S. president having secret dealings with criminal organizations is not just unsettling, it's profoundly disturbing. It casts a dark shadow over Clinton's legacy, questioning whether he was truly the champion of the people he portrayed himself as, or whether his rise to power was facilitated by unsavory forces with their own agendas. The connection between Clinton and the mafia remains a haunting mystery in American political history, one that has never been fully explained and likely never will be. 26. The mysterious death of John F. Kennedy. What was covered up? The assassination of John F. Kennedy in 1963 is one of the most iconic events in American history. The images of his violent death, followed by the swift swearing-in of Lyndon B. Johnson aboard Air Force One, remain etched in the public's memory. But what if the story of Kennedy's death is more complicated and more sinister than we've been led to believe? The official narrative of JFK's assassination is well known. He was shot by Lee Harvey Oswald while riding in a motorcade through Dallas, Texas. Oswald was arrested shortly after the shooting, and many assumed that the case was quickly closed. But as time passed, questions began to arise. How could a man with such a troubled history, Oswald, be the lone assassin? Why was the evidence against him so flimsy? And why did the US government act so quickly to wrap up the investigation, seemingly without considering all the evidence? What makes this story particularly disturbing are the rumors of a cover-up that have persisted for decades. Some conspiracy theorists believe that JFK's death was part of a larger plot, one involving not just a lone gunman, but a network of powerful figures in the government and beyond. Some believe that CIA operatives, who were unhappy with Kennedy's handling of the Cuban Missile Crisis and his more liberal policies, orchestrated the assassination to remove him from power. Others suggest that the mafia, angered by Kennedy's crackdown on organized crime, may have played a role in his death. The immediate aftermath of the assassination was shrouded in secrecy. The Warren Commission, which was tasked with investigating the assassination, quickly concluded that Oswald acted alone. But many historians and investigators have pointed to discrepancies in the official report, inconsistencies in the evidence, mysterious eyewitnesses, and questions about the behavior of government agencies following the assassination. In the years since, numerous books, documentaries, and investigations have suggested that the true story of Kennedy's death may never be known. The possibility that JFK was assassinated by a coordinated effort involving multiple factions, each with their own agenda, raises disturbing questions about who truly controls the narrative in American politics. What makes this story even more chilling is the way the government handled the aftermath. Cover-ups, misleading information, and manipulation of the public were all part of the effort to maintain the official story. The more questions that were asked, the more tightly the story was controlled, as if the truth about JFK's assassination was something that could not, and would not, be allowed to be exposed. In the years since, the mystery has only deepened, with each new piece of evidence seemingly adding more fuel to the fire. The assassination of John F. Kennedy is one of the most well-documented events in American history, yet the true cause of his death remains one of the greatest mysteries of the 20th century. Was he truly killed by a lone gunman, or was his death part of a larger conspiracy that remains buried in the halls of power? Whatever the truth may be, one thing is certain: Kennedy's assassination was not just the tragic end of a presidency, it was the beginning of a nationwide obsession with hidden truths and dark secrets that would haunt American politics for generations. 27. Franklin D. Roosevelt's health cover-up, the hidden truth behind his presidency. Franklin D. Roosevelt, the 32nd President of the United States, is remembered for his decisive leadership during the Great Depression and World War II, and for his role in shaping modern America. His legacy is immense, but behind his powerful public image lay a hidden truth that would shake the very foundations of American democracy if the public had known. Roosevelt was battling polio for most of his presidency, but for years, this fact was kept from the American people. The story begins in 1921, when Roosevelt contracted polio, which left him paralyzed from the waist down. Despite this disability, Roosevelt's public life continued with remarkable success. But what is truly disturbing is how he and his political allies concealed his condition. Roosevelt's aides and doctors worked tirelessly to hide the extent of his physical impairments, using a series of staged photographs and carefully controlled appearances to maintain the illusion that he was physically able to lead the nation. During his time in office, Roosevelt would often be photographed standing, with the help of assistants, or sitting behind a desk, concealing his inability to walk. He would frequently deliver speeches, but there was little mention of his disability, and the public largely remained unaware of the toll polio had taken on his body. The media played a crucial role in this cover-up, often framing Roosevelt as the strong, charismatic leader that the nation needed, even as his health deteriorated. What's most disturbing about this cover-up is the magnitude of the deception. Roosevelt's health had become a well-guarded secret, with few knowing the extent of his physical struggles. His aides, including Louis Howe, played a central role in controlling Roosevelt's public image, even going so far as to prevent the press from photographing him in his wheelchair or with visible signs of his condition. The truth was hidden from the American public for over a decade, and many feel that this deception went too far. How could a nation trust a leader who was not forthcoming about his health struggles? And what effect did Roosevelt's disability have on his ability to govern effectively, particularly as he entered his fourth term in office? This cover-up also raises the disturbing question of whether the American people had the right to know about Roosevelt's physical limitations. His health was critical to his ability to lead during some of the most pivotal moments in American history, particularly during World War II. As Roosevelt became more physically incapacitated, did his advisors and family members take control of his decisions in a way that undermined the democratic process? Were there moments when Roosevelt's disability affected his judgment or made him vulnerable to political manipulation? The deception surrounding Roosevelt's health continued until his death in 1945, and it wasn't until after his passing that the full extent of his illness was made public. The revelation came too late to affect his legacy, but the moral implications of concealing his condition remain one of the most disturbing chapters of his presidency. What would have happened if the public had known the truth? Would it have changed the way the country viewed his leadership? And perhaps most importantly, how many other truths about political figures are being hidden from the public for the sake of preserving a carefully crafted image? 28. The true story of Richard Nixon's paranoia and the Watergate tapes. Richard Nixon, the 37th President of the United States, is a figure whose paranoia and obsession with power ultimately led to one of the greatest political scandals in U.S. history, the Watergate scandal. Nixon's downfall was not just a result of his actions, but of a mindset that led him to betray the very principles of democracy he was meant to uphold. Nixon's infamous Watergate tapes, recorded conversations between Nixon and his closest advisors, have become synonymous with his presidency. These tapes were not just recordings of political strategy, they were a window into the president's psyche, revealing a man obsessed with control, fearful of losing his grip on power, and willing to go to any length to maintain his position. The tapes, which were discovered after the break-in at the Democratic National Committee headquarters in Washington, D.C., were a bombshell that exposed Nixon's paranoia and desperation. The recordings revealed conversations where Nixon and his aides discussed how to cover up the break-in, how to manipulate the press, and how to use government agencies to punish political enemies. What makes these tapes particularly disturbing is the calmness with which Nixon and his staff discussed their illegal activities. They didn't see themselves as criminals. They saw themselves as men fighting for their survival in the highest office in the land. Nixon's increasing paranoia is perhaps the most chilling aspect of the tapes. He was obsessed with the idea that he was being watched and that his political enemies were constantly trying to undermine him. This fear led him to create an enormous system of surveillance, tapping phones, recording conversations, and employing illegal means to neutralize his opponents. The tapes show Nixon's obsession with secrecy, his refusal to trust anyone, and his willingness to compromise democracy to achieve his ends. As the tapes were revealed, the American public was stunned by the extent of Nixon's deception and abuse of power. The scandal led to his resignation in 1974, the first and only time a U.S. president has resigned from office. But the true horror of the Watergate scandal isn't just in the break-in. It's in the willingness of the president to use the full power of the government to cover up his crimes. The tapes exposed a man who was deeply corrupt and willing to destroy the very institutions he had sworn to protect. The Watergate scandal remains a powerful reminder of the danger of unchecked power and the destructive effects of paranoia on leadership. Nixon's actions were driven by a need to control every aspect of his presidency, and the Watergate tapes reveal just how far he was willing to go to secure his legacy. What makes this story even more disturbing is the realization that Nixon's actions were not just the result of one bad decision. They were a symptom of a larger mindset that infected his entire administration. His paranoia and fear of losing power ultimately led to his downfall, but the damage done to the trust in American democracy remains felt today. 29. Jimmy Carter's hidden battle with the CIA. Was he sabotaged? Jimmy Carter, the 39th President of the United States, is often remembered for his humanitarian work and his role in brokering the Camp David Accords, which brought peace between Egypt and Israel. However, his presidency was also marred by a hidden war, one that took place not on the battlefield, but within the halls of his own government. The struggle between Carter and the CIA is one of the most disturbing and underreported aspects of his presidency, and many historians believe that internal sabotage played a significant role in undermining his leadership. Carter, who had no previous experience in politics, came into office with a strong desire to reform the U.S. government. He promised to reduce the influence of the military-industrial complex and was deeply committed to bringing more accountability to intelligence agencies like the CIA. But this commitment to reform was met with resistance from powerful factions within the intelligence community. In particular, Carter's attempts to curb the CIA's power and reassert control over foreign policy were met with hostile opposition from key figures within the agency. The most famous and disturbing incident in this ongoing battle occurred during the Iran hostage crisis of 1979. In November of that year, 52 American diplomats and citizens were taken hostage by Iranian militants, and Carter's administration was thrust into a grueling diplomatic and military effort to bring them home. However, some believe that the CIA, which was deeply involved in U.S. operations in the Middle East, had its own agenda, and may have deliberately sabotaged Carter's efforts to resolve the crisis in order to undermine his presidency. One of the key events fueling this theory was the failed rescue mission to free the hostages in April 1980, known as Operation Eagle Claw. The mission, which involved a series of complicated maneuvers in Iran, ended in disaster, with 8 U.S. servicemen dying in a crash during the operation. Many in Carter's inner circle were deeply suspicious of the CIA's role in the failure, and it's been suggested that intelligence failures and deliberate withholding of information led to the mission's collapse. Some believe that elements within the CIA may have deliberately misled Carter about the feasibility of the operation, and that they delayed the mission to further discredit him in the eyes of the American public. Adding fuel to the fire, Carter's relationship with the CIA became increasingly strained as the hostages remained in captivity. Carter was frustrated with the lack of actionable intelligence from the CIA, and some believe that this frustration was compounded by a disloyalty within the agency. It's rumored that the CIA may have been working behind the scenes to sabotage Carter's political future by prolonging the crisis and weakening his political position. The failure to bring the hostages home before the 1980 presidential election was a key factor in Carter's defeat to Ronald Reagan, and many have speculated that the CIA's sabotage played a significant role in the outcome. After leaving office, Carter went on to become a global diplomat and humanitarian, but the damage done by his strained relationship with the CIA was permanent. The belief that a key U.S. intelligence agency may have actively undermined a sitting president's efforts to resolve an international crisis is deeply disturbing, raising questions about the balance of power between the executive branch and intelligence agencies. Carter's presidency may have been shaped not just by external factors like the Iran hostage crisis, but by the silent war being waged within his own government, a battle that ultimately contributed to his political downfall. 30. The mysterious life and death of John F. Kennedy's younger brother, Robert Kennedy. Robert F. Kennedy, the younger brother of John F. Kennedy, was poised to become one of the most influential political figures in American history. Known for his charismatic leadership, his advocacy for civil rights, and his staunch opposition to the Vietnam War, RFK seemed destined to follow in his brother's footsteps and perhaps even become president. But just as he was at the height of his political career, Robert Kennedy was tragically assassinated in 1968, leaving the nation reeling. However, the story of RFK's life and death is shrouded in mystery, with many disturbing unanswered questions about the events that led to his death and the political forces that may have played a role. The assassination of Robert Kennedy occurred on the night of June 5, 1968, just after he had won the California primary in his bid for the Democratic nomination for president. RFK was shot by Sirhan Sirhan, a Palestinian man who claimed to have been motivated by anger over Kennedy's pro-Israel stance. But the official story of the assassination has never fully satisfied those who have questioned the circumstances surrounding the event. Many believe that Sirhan may not have acted alone, and that the assassination was the result of a larger conspiracy involving powerful figures who saw RFK as a threat to their political agendas. One of the most disturbing aspects of Kennedy's death is the unexplained behavior of Sirhan Sirhan. Some conspiracy theorists believe that Sirhan was manipulated or even controlled by outside forces, and that he was not the real assassin. Eyewitnesses reported that Sirhan appeared to be in a trance-like state during the shooting, and there were even claims that the fatal shot that killed Kennedy came from a position behind him, making it physically impossible for Sirhan to have fired it. These inconsistencies have led many to believe that RFK's death was not the work of a lone gunman but part of a much darker plot. In the years since, various conspiracy theories have emerged, some implicating the CIA, mafia, and even members of the Kennedy family itself. These theories have never been conclusively proven, but they continue to haunt the legacy of Robert Kennedy. What makes this story even more chilling is the political climate in which RFK was operating. By 1968, Kennedy had become a powerful voice for change, advocating for civil rights, the poor, and an end to the war in Vietnam. He was seen as a beacon of hope for many, and his political ascension threatened the status quo, particularly among those who had supported the military-industrial complex and the political elite. What makes Robert Kennedy's death so unsettling is the legacy it left behind. His death not only robbed the country of a potential president but also left questions unanswered. The conspiracy theories surrounding his assassination have never fully been addressed, and the true circumstances remain shrouded in mystery. Some still believe that the forces that silenced RFK were the same forces that had silenced his brother, President John F. Kennedy, forces that were determined to maintain the status quo, no matter the cost. Kennedy's death marked a tragic end to the hopes and dreams that so many had placed on his shoulders. He was a symbol of change and progress, and his assassination represents the dark forces that sometimes intervene when those in power feel threatened. What makes this story particularly disturbing is the belief that RFK's death was not a random act of violence, but the result of a carefully orchestrated plan designed to eliminate a powerful figure who might have reshaped American politics. 31. The mysterious disappearance of James Buchanan's fiancée. James Buchanan, the 15th President of the United States, is often remembered for his failure to prevent the American Civil War. His presidency is typically regarded as one of the weakest in U.S. history, marked by indecision and political ineptitude. However, what many people don't know is that Buchanan's personal life was filled with mystery, particularly surrounding the disappearance of his fiancée, Ann Coleman. In the early 1800s, Buchanan was engaged to Ann Coleman, the daughter of a wealthy Pennsylvania businessman. The two were very much in love, and Buchanan had every intention of marrying her. But just months before their wedding, Ann mysteriously died. While the cause of her death was officially attributed to a severe illness, many believe that she had been driven to suicide due to the stress of their strained relationship. The real mystery, however, lies in the details surrounding Ann Coleman's death. Buchanan's family was devastated, but some of his close friends and advisors began to whisper that there was more to the story than a mere illness. Rumors circulated that Buchanan had abandoned and at a crucial moment, and that her death may have been the result of a broken heart or a dramatic fallout between them. But the intrigue didn't stop there. Buchanan never married after Anne's death, and many speculated that he never fully recovered from the emotional trauma. His lifelong single status became the subject of much gossip, and rumors about his sexuality would persist throughout his life. Some claimed that Buchanan's strong bond with his political friend, William Rufus King, a U.S. Senator from Alabama, was more than just a friendship, with whispers about an affectionate relationship between the two men. This theory was bolstered by the fact that King was often referred to as Buchanan's better half, and the two lived together for many years, though there was never any definitive proof to support these rumors. What's truly unsettling about Buchanan's personal life is the secrecy and ambiguity surrounding his relationship with Anne Coleman. The question of whether her death was a result of emotional distress, and whether Buchanan played a role in it, has never been fully answered. This adds another layer to Buchanan's complicated legacy, leaving behind a haunting mystery about the president's life and relationships, and how much of his personal tragedy affected his ability to lead the nation during one of its most critical moments. 32. The tragic death of William Henry Harrison. Did his enemies cause it? William Henry Harrison, the 9th President of the United States, is best known for his tragic death just 31 days into his presidency, making him the shortest-serving president in American history. But what's most disturbing about Harrison's death isn't just the fact that he died so soon after taking office. It's the mystery surrounding the events leading up to his death and the possibility that it may have been deliberately caused by his political enemies. Harrison contracted pneumonia after delivering his inaugural speech in the freezing cold on March 4, 1841. The 68-year-old president, eager to begin his term, gave an extremely long speech without wearing a coat, which, combined with the harsh weather, led to his rapid decline in health. Within days, Harrison was bedridden, and just a month later, he died in the White House. At the time, many believed that his death was the unfortunate result of poor health and the strain of such an inaugural ordeal. However, there have been persistent rumors that Harrison's death was not a mere coincidence. Some historians have suggested that Harrison's political enemies, specifically those within the Democratic Party, may have deliberately orchestrated a delayed attack on him through poison. The theory goes that Harrison's prolonged illness and sudden death were part of a larger conspiracy to remove him from office and prevent him from enacting his Whig Party agenda. This theory is fueled by the fact that Harrison's death occurred at a time of significant political tension between the Whigs, who sought to limit the power of the presidency, and the Democrats, who were eager to see the Whigs fail. Harrison's administration, with its populist leanings and promises of reform, posed a threat to the established order, and it's believed that certain factions within the Democratic Party saw his early death as the only way to neutralize his influence before it could take root. While there is no conclusive evidence to support the poisoning theory, the fact that Harrison's death was so sudden and suspicious has continued to fuel conspiracy theories. Was Harrison's death a tragic accident, or was it part of a larger political struggle? And if it was a conspiracy, what does this say about the lengths to which political adversaries were willing to go to ensure their own success? Harrison's mysterious death remains one of the most disturbing episodes in American presidential history, not only because of the shocking nature of his demise, but because it raises serious questions about the role of political power in determining the fate of a president. The theory of deliberate sabotage remains a haunting possibility that, while not proven, continues to captivate those who study American history. 33. The dark side of Teddy Roosevelt, his violence and desire for war. Theodore Roosevelt, the 26th President of the United States, is often celebrated as one of America's most beloved and dynamic presidents. Known for his robust personality, love of adventure, and his policies that expanded the U.S. into a global power, Roosevelt is remembered as a man of courage and ambition. But behind this iconic image lies a darker side of Roosevelt's character, one that included a deep desire for war, an obsession with military might, and a violent streak that set the tone for his approach to politics. One of the most disturbing aspects of Roosevelt's legacy is his attitude toward war. He was a man who was deeply fascinated by violence, and his belief in the benefits of war went far beyond just the rhetoric of his time. Roosevelt believed that war was a natural, even necessary part of human existence, and that the United States should not shy away from military conflict if it was in the country's best interests. Roosevelt's belief in American exceptionalism drove him to view the U.S. as a force for good, and he was eager to use American military power to spread American values around the world. Perhaps the most disturbing example of Roosevelt's violent beliefs was his role in the Spanish-American War of 1898, during which he led the famous Rough Riders in Cuba. While the war was framed as a noble cause, aimed at freeing Cuba from Spanish rule, Roosevelt's actions were driven by a deeper belief in American imperialism and the idea that the U.S. had the right to expand its influence through force. Roosevelt was eager to demonstrate the power of the U.S. military and took pleasure in the bloodshed and violence that occurred during the conflict. Roosevelt's violent tendencies didn't end with the Spanish-American War. He was a staunch advocate of American imperialism and played a central role in the construction of the Panama Canal, which was built with the threat of force against Colombia. His desire for war was also evident in his aggressive policies toward Latin America, which led to the U.S. intervention in several countries. But what makes Roosevelt's legacy particularly disturbing is the way his violent beliefs influenced his approach to domestic policies. Roosevelt was deeply committed to the idea of a strong, masculine nation, and he believed that violence and war were essential to shaping American identity. This belief led him to adopt extreme positions on issues such as race, the military, and government intervention, and it shaped his view of the American public as needing to be toughened by adversity and struggle. Roosevelt's desire for war and his willingness to embrace violence as a political tool remain one of the darker elements of his presidency. Though he is often celebrated for his progressive domestic policies and his efforts to strengthen the U.S. military, the violent legacy he left behind cannot be ignored. His belief that war was a catalyst for change had a lasting impact on American foreign policy, and it set the stage for future military interventions that would shape U.S. history for decades.